In this video, we'll be covering the second part of the 10 factors to consider when buying investment property. In the first video, you recall we covered this 5, which was what do you want to achieve, do research, what is your preferred investment strategy, what is the gearing and how does it work, and property management. In today's one, we are going to be looking at this other 5, which will cover the total of 10. Let's look at number 6. Number 6 says listed property shares versus physical real estate. If you decide to invest in property markets without buying the specific property, you can consider purchasing SA listed property shares. You can decide that you do not want to invest in the actual property. However, rather you go and buy the shares of the SA listed property shares. Property companies, such as those that develop and manage properties of various types, are listed on the local and international stock markets and generally comprises the asset class known as listed properties. So what happens is that some of the developers, they are listed on the stock exchange. So what you rather can do, you can just go and buy shares. It might be cheaper to buy shares than going and buy the physical asset. And maybe shares might appreciate quicker compared to the house. Two of the biggest local companies are Growth Point Properties and Redfin Properties. An example that I'm giving to you is that you can decide to buy shares in the Growth Point Properties or Redfin Properties. If you do decide that you do not want to buy the real or the physical property. This asset class gives investors exposure to a range of property classes, including industrial, office, commercial, residential space. There are over 40 local property unit trusts, Loan Stock and REIT, Real Estate Investment Trust, listed on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. So in the stock exchange, you can buy more than 40 local property unit trust, Loan Stock, or REIT, which is Real Estate Investment Trust. They offer the benefits for real estate ownership without problems of being a landlord. And unlike physical real estate, these shares can be quicker and easily to trade. Now, what's the difference between you going and buying shares and you buying a house? When it comes to trading, it is very easy to sell shares as opposed to selling a house. So you might sit down in your decision to buy a property and realize that actually you are not that risk. Your risk appetite is not that high for you to go with buying a physical property, but rather you want to put a very small portion of the money that you have available through buying shares. And that way you are able to contribute in the real estate through property shares as opposed to physical real estate. So in your decision, there's other kind of things that you can consider before you go ahead and say you are buying a physical real estate. Number 7, take the emotion out of the purchase. Why is it important that you take the emotion out of the purchase? Because there are a number of things that you need to calculate and consider when it comes to buying a property. You might really like to buy a property. However, you have to ask yourself, what will be the net yield? What are you going to be left with after you took out your management fees, your levies, your rates, and any other related cost that comes with owning a property? I'll make an example that you can think of working out if you are about to buy a property. So let us say, for example, the purchase price at 1.5 million and the unit you're buying or the apartment you're buying at 70 square meter. The cost per square meter, obviously, if you divide, it's like 21,428. And then the monthly rate, it's 500. Monthly leave is like 2,000. and then we make assumption that you're going to receive a rental of 8.5 thousand. Then you decided that you're going to go through management route, which means you're going to have an agent, and then let us make an assumption that the agent will take 10% of the rental income. Overall, when we look at what you're going to be left with, it's a net monthly rental after cost of 5,150, which leaves you with a net yield of 4.12%. So if you're looking at this, if you went and bought the property with emotions because you feel like you love the property, you love the physical property, at this point, you will be left with so much to add on top of the rent that you would have received to cover the repayment of 1.5 million. So this is why it is very important that you sit back, relax, and make calculations. Take the emotions and the love you have for the property aside and tell yourself that you need to calculate what will be the cost that you will incur as a result of this decision, or as a result of this purchase. So in that way, you will go ahead knowing what to expect, all the costs that will be involved. So which is the kind of thing that you should do when it comes to the investment property purchase. The number 8, set up or adjust your existing budget. So what do we mean by that? As there are many expenses involved, you need to do an analysis of this cost. Set up a monthly budget and ensure that if your property is not tenanted, you will still be able to afford bond repayment. So, what does that mean? It means when you have tenants, in the times where you have tenants, try to save some amount aside for the times where you do not have tenants. Why is that important? It is important on the basis that so when the tenants aren't in the house or aren't in your property, you are still able to pay the bank. Because what are the risk of not paying the bank? The bank will take their house because it is actually legally the bank's house until it fully paid up. So make your budgets and your budgets adjust or keep savings aside for the cases where the property is not tenanted. So those are the kind of costs that comes with owning a house or owning a property or owning an apartment investment property that you cannot run away from. You cannot exactly predict whether at all times you will have your investment property tenanted. For that reason, set aside for those rainy days if they do happen to take place in your case. Number 9, you need to understand the risk. So, what are the risks then that comes with owning the property or investment property? As with all things in the property purchase, buying an investment property is not without its risk. Some of the most significant risks are you might not be able to achieve the rental income that you anticipated. So before you buy a property, you might have a rental income that you thought you would be able to receive from a property. I'll make an example. You buy a property of 1.1 million and your expectation is that you're going to get a rental income of 11,000. However, when you do actually lease your property, you are unable to get a tenant that is willing to pay that much. And then you are in a position where you need to adjust the rental property income that you expected or the rent fee to the tenant or the potential tenant. So those are kind of risks that comes with going and buying the investment property. You'd end up then having to pay for expensive repairs. So what happens if you buy a second-hand property as opposed to the new property is that the property might be at the stage where it needs a lot of major repairs. So you need to take into account and consider the potential of paying for repairs in the future. What else that is a risk? You could end up having to pay, you have to pay for taxes, and those taxes could potentially increase and they could increase more than you would have expected. Let's say the municipality in that area, they want to cover some cost, and they said the way that they can cover those costs is through increasing the property rate maybe by 15%. In your side, your expectation would have been around 8% margin. However, you'll find yourself in the hot water where you have to pay additional 7% increase on your property rate, which you might have not been expected. So that is also a risk that you need to understand of going ahead to buy an investment properties. Levies could increase, or they could be a one-off levy to maintain a property. So what happens if you buy in an estate? They might come and say when they gave you the rate initially, they underestimated the rate. So they needed to increase the rate maybe by 250 or by 500 per month. That would be something that you wouldn't have expected initially, but you find yourself in that situation where you have to pay additional 300 or 500 per month, which might be a lot. So meaning to say now it brings a risk to you of not being able to pay that extra amount. Sometimes what the developers will do, they will say, we're going to have special levies for a certain period. Maybe they want to make changes on the things that they have in the estate. It could be a number of things. They are changing the prepaid meter structure or the other things that they wanted to do in the estate. It then would require that they have to put in extra levies for you to cover those costs. So those are kind of things, and those are risks of owning investment property that you have to understand and ask yourself, do you have savings set aside for matters like that? Then what is the other thing that you need to understand is a risk of owning an investment property? The local market economy could change. So what do I mean by that? Things like COVID that we once saw might affect your tenants. And if they do, it means that you're not going to be getting a rental income. And that will be something that you wouldn't have predicted prior to the purchase. So what do you do when it comes to that? You need to have investment to still be able to pay the bond that you owe the bank. So you could have bad tenants resulting in repair cost or even eviction cost. It can take up to 18 months to obtain an eviction order at a cost of between 5 to 25,000 if the eviction is unopposed, right? So now you have to also understand that some tenants might decide to enter your property and decide not to leave. So in that case, then you need to think of the cost of eviction. So you need to understand that that could also take 18 months or longer. Then this takes us to the last part of the things you need to consider when you go ahead and go for investment property. The restructure at your estate plan. So the restructure at your estate plan might affect you. If you have used finance or gearing to purchase the property, ensure that or your debt, your spouse is not forced to sell the property. He or she will more than likely need the rental income to continue living. So structuring an estate plan and updating your will is an important aspect of financial planning. On your debt, your spouse will require a certain amount of income to sustain his or her lifestyle. Therefore, you should consider increasing your existing life and disability cover to ensure that the property debts can be settled. So now you have this investment property. When you die, in an unfortunate event that we know that is certain, that one day we're all gonna die, you must ensure that you have planned your estate in a way that this investment property has not to be taken by the bank if it financed, because now no one is able to pay for that property. So what do you do then? Have the cover, like your disability cover if in case you become disabled in future, or have the life cover that will cover the cost of those house in case you passed away. So there's a lot of things that comes with going for investment property. You have to think about a lot of things which could amount to risk, how you plan your estate, and then what are the things that could happen. So don't use your emotion when it comes to buying a property. Don't say, because I love that property, I'm going to buy. Sit back, understand the risk you are getting into, and understand the benefit. If the benefit outweigh the risk, then go ahead. Let's take us to the end of this video, which was the two-part series. Thank you so much for listening up until this far. Enjoy the rest of your day, and bye-bye.